We're joined by NAACP President Derek
Hello,
Johnson.
everybody.
Derek,
this is based on the Tyre murder,
what kind of changes
which
does the
unfolded
NAACP want to see when it comes to police?
5 police officers beating him to death and putting him in the hospital. 3 days later, the guy died
We need a database
over a traffic stop.
One of the
Mind
officers involved apparently
of course, the nation's upset and uproar.
And he was able
Yes,
to leave
you might
from
see
this
peaceful
agency
marches,
and go
but
to the Memphis Police
justice
Department.
must be
There
satisfied.
needs to be a federal standard around
Because
training,
we can't have
particularly
this.
around de-escalation. There's no reason why a traffic violation should be a death sentence.
Exactly. And this is live, by the way. I have not watched this. I have not rewound it. It is live.
Also have training around mental health issues. I mean, there are multiple tools.
I'm recording it. If you're wondering, you're probably thinking I could watch it myself. Well, just in case they remove it from YouTube, that's what the government tends to do. If they do, I'll just upload this video. So, based on the Tyre Nichols murder.
In a statement, you said, Derek, that if anyone needs to see this video, it is every single leader in Congress. Do you think that the death of Tyre Nichols will be the catalyst for federal legislation?
Well, you know, quite frankly, we thought the George Floyd murder would have been the catalyst. It would have been great if the Tamir Rice murder of the 12-year-old boy would have been the catalyst. The invasion of Breonna Taylor's home, her being killed in the bed, sleeping, should have been the catalyst. I can go on and name all of these victims of police misconduct. What I really want to name is the piece of legislation that can pass out of the House, pass out of the Senate, and get to the president's desk for signature. And that's most important. Every member of Congress have an obligation to ensure that our communities are safe and that policing is done much differently than what we have seen over the last several years. And for African Americans, what we have known and talked about for the last several decades.
The Memphis police chief has called the behavior in the video incomprehensible and unconscionable. What is your reaction to how this case has been handled so far?
Well, I commend the police chief. I commend the city officials in Memphis. I commend the DA because they wasted no time to review, make a decision, suspend the officers, and now charge the officers. In August, the citizens of Memphis, they went to the polls and they elected a new DA because they wanted a heightened level of accountability for police officers. One badge should not be a shield from accountability. And that's what we're watching here. So I commend the chief, the mayor, the district attorney, and all of the elected officials for standing up and setting the tone of what should be the normal process in which these type incidents are dealt with. We didn't have to wait 9 months for the release of the video. The video is being released within 2 weeks of the incident. That's important, so I commend the local elected officials.
Just going further on the timeline, as you mentioned, in less than 3 weeks, we saw 5 officers fired, indicted, and now tonight the release of this video. What does that tell you about the Memphis Police Department, and is it a blueprint that can be followed by other departments?
Well, absolutely a blueprint. No, it is beautiful to see a female African-American police chief who understands accountability. Because if you watch how she has presented herself, how she is now standing up and holding those officers accountable, that's definitely a blueprint. It's also important to know that the district attorney office must be an independent office from the law enforcement agency, so they don't see themselves as an appendage to police officers, therefore trying to protect them and not hold them accountable. And that's also very important. It should be the blueprint of how these cases are handled.
Derek Johnson. Derek, thank you very much for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
As reaction pours in to video footage of Nichols' arrest, there are new questions about the policing policies departments use during encounters like this one.
For more on this case and investigation, Alfred Titus joins us for more. He is an adjunct assistant professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and a retired NYPD homicide detective and hostage negotiator. Welcome, Alfred. You know, there's a lot to talk about here, sort of a lot to unpack, but what stands out to you in this moment with respect to this case?
Yes, well, first I'd like to thank you, Elaine and Catherine, for having me on tonight. And I definitely would like to send my heartfelt condolences out to the Nichols family. As far as this case goes, one of the things that bothered me from the time I initially heard it was the fact that there are 5 officers present, and I haven't seen the video yet myself, so I'm just going on what I've been told. There are 5 officers present, possibly assaulting Mr. Nichols, and not one of them follows the policy, which is the duty to interfere policy and stop the illegal action from happening. That is a big problem for me. 5 officers, regardless of their color, not one of them was humane enough to stop the attack. That was a problem.
Based on your law enforcement experience, what's your assessment of the allegations against these officers and the fact that they're all facing the same charges?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure the video will clarify all of that. The fact that they, based on what the previous reporter stated, it sounds like they did what's called a violent felony car stop. Now, a violent felony car stop is only done when you have a seriously violent felon in a car and there's a car chase and you think there are guns in the car. So for a basic car stop, it does not make sense. Now, the Scorpion unit, which actually stands for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhood. The acronym is Scorpion Team. That team, what they do is they look for minor traffic violations, and then with that, they use the stops that they're able to make to look for drugs and guns. And that's how they clean up the community. So, you know, with that in mind, that's why Mr. Nichols was stopped. I'm not sure what kind of car he was driving. I'm not sure if the windows were tinted. I'm not sure about all of that because we haven't seen the video, but it would not surprise me if the vehicle he's driving is a specific type of vehicle and there are other common characteristics that would make the police want to stop this vehicle. And he may have done a minor infraction like not coming to a full stop at a stop sign or not signaling in time if he made a turn. It could be something as simple as that. But the fact that this Scorpion team is an active, proactive team, that's what they address. And they swoon in on him, and, you know, we know what happened from there.
So based on that, Alfred, I want to go back to what you said a moment ago. Under the law, in what cases are police allowed to use lethal force?
Police are only allowed to use lethal force when lethal force is being used against them or against someone else. That is not the case here at all. There was, based on what I've heard, again, I haven't seen the video yet, but based on what I've heard, there was not even a need for a taser. The reporter who spoke earlier stated that Mr. Nichols seemed surprised that they were even stopping him because, you know, as we found out, he's not that person. You know, he's not a violent felon. He's not someone that you need to box in. He's not someone that you need to pull out of a car or treat violently. He's not aggressive towards you, so there should be no aggression towards him. That's how policing works.
As you mentioned earlier, these officers who are charged with the killing of Tyre Nichols were part of this specialized unit, the so-called Scorpion unit. In this case, it was created in the fall of 2021 to help control violence in that city. Is that going to be a significant factor in the investigation? And are we seeing more widespread use of these so-called suppression units?
Absolutely. Well, in this country, we have seen an increase in crime, and a lot of time cities put together these proactive teams to go out and address the rise in crime, and that's what the Scorpion unit is. From what I understand, there are a few other complaints against the unit that are similar, excessive force types of complaints. And I believe that the community will call for the unit to be disbanded. I believe that the police will review the data and statistics on the unit and then make that determination. One of the things that makes it difficult for the police to just disband the unit is the fact that within 6 months from when it was created in October 2021 through January 2022, they made over 566 arrests, seized over $100,000 in cash, seized 270 vehicles, and over 250 weapons off of the Memphis streets. So the idea of the unit is good, but the problem is that power and that authority can sometimes be abused and sometimes go to the head of some of the officers, and that's what we saw here.
I wonder, looking at the sort of national landscape, Alfred, have there been some changes in policing since the death of George Floyd in 2020?
There were some changes made. There were criminal justice reforms with regards to bail and the type of chokeholds and chest compressions that officers can make when they're apprehended an individual. As a matter of fact, in New York City, they removed the plainclothes units, which was another thing that was done in response to the George Floyd incident. But there still needs to be more, and not necessarily more legal policies like that, but more directed to the police department. The police department has to become more accountable. They need to improve training. And, I would wonder if these individuals who have been in this unit since October 2021, have they been to any training since they were in the unit? These officers with this much power and this much authority need to be monitored closely. And by sending them off to a day or two of training every 3 or 4 months, that allows the police department to monitor them and make sure that they are not straying from their intended goals.
Alfred Titus, thank you.
You're welcome.
We have some video. Alfred Titus, I'm going to ask you just to stand by for 1 second. I understand that the first clip that we have here is from an overhead camera, what they call a sky cop. We understand that this is very blurry video of the beating of Tyre Nichols, and there's also no audio, so let's watch now. It's about 1 minute and 22 seconds. This video may be disturbing to many people who are watching. This is part of an hour-long release from the Memphis Police Department. Alfred, I want to bring you back in. Just give us your assessment of what we're watching right here.
Yeah, okay. It appears that they are trying to restrain Mr. Nichols. It does not look like he's handcuffed at that point. I noticed a few punches. One individual towards the end extended his ass, which is like a baton, an expandable baton. And I'm assuming he strikes Mr. Nichols with that. These officers are frustrated right now. They cannot get Mr. Nichols to comply for whatever reason, and they are frustrated, and that frustration leads to the type of abuse that we're seeing. They are punching him. I believe I saw a few kicks in there. They are trying to get him to comply. Unfortunately, what a lot of times you don't realize is that while you're punching and kicking someone, their arms are going to be defending themselves. They're not going to be putting their hands behind their back, and that's what makes the whole stuff. There goes a case. See.
But my question, Alfred, if I could, because I'm not a police officer, I'm a lay person, and I'm watching this, and maybe others are asking themselves whether the use of the baton, the kicking of Tyre Nichols, the punches, is appropriate at all in this circumstance.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That is not police procedure. That is not police policy. That is not the way you subdue an individual who is non-violent.
Alfred, I also want to ask you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to ask about there appears to be another officer sort of on the outskirts of what is happening who isn't actively participating, does not have his hands directly on Mr. Nichols at that point, but appearing to see what is happening from his vantage point. What's your assessment of that officer's actions?
That officer is equally as guilty as the officers who are assaulting Mr. Nichols. Right. One of the criminal justice reforms that came about is called a duty to intervene. That means that if an officer sees another officer doing something like what we see there, excessive force or any kind of illegal activity, they have the duty to, number one, intervene. And if it's a situation where you cannot intervene, then they have the duty to report the incident. And by not doing that, you are equally as guilty as the individuals who are assaulting Mr. Nichols. He should have jumped right in and stopped that immediately.
Alfred Titus, thank you. We are closely following reaction to the body cam footage showing what happened between 5 Memphis police officers and 29-year-old Tyre Nichols during a January 7th traffic stop. Nichols died 3 days later. Authorities have described the video as appalling. The family has urged any protests to remain peaceful. Earlier, Nichols' mother sent this message to the officers charged in her son's death.
And I want to say to the 5 police officers that murdered my son, you also disgraced your own families. But you know what? I'm going to pray for you and your families. Because at the end of the day, this shouldn't have happened.
No, that's right.
This just shouldn't have happened. And we want justice for my son.
Alexis Hogue Forjoy rejoins us on set. She's a civil rights attorney and assistant professor at Brooklyn Law School. We also have CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca and Chief National Affairs and Justice correspondent Jeff Bougues on the ground for us in Memphis. Omar, you've been on the ground. Assess the mood for us now that some of the video has been released.
Well, we understand that there's some protests that are going on and possibly blocking off part of I-55. If people aren't familiar with that, that's a highway and it's a bridge that when you cross over into Arkansas, into Tennessee, right here into Memphis, is a pretty busy area. But we understand there are people there that are gathering. We're here right in front of the Civil Rights Museum here, right by the Lorraine Hotel, and it's quiet. There have been people walking by and they've asked us, have you seen the video? Is it out? They are aware, they are watching, and we have gone through video 2, which is that top Sky Cop thing, and you're right, there's no audio on it, but it is, as the chief of police described, where it is brutal.
And Jeff, let me turn to you. As we continue to look at some of these pictures out of Washington and other places around the country, what stands out to you about the Memphis Police Department's handling of this case?
Well, I think by most accounts they were pretty swift to take action. You know, in the past, especially if you look back 10 years at the Michael Brown case in Ferguson, Missouri, at that time you had a lot of people in the public who felt like police officers were never being held accountable. And then shortly after Ferguson, there was more focus on holding police officers accountable, and people who used to keep track of the data in terms of how many officers are charged or convicted, the numbers were going up. And I think part of what law enforcement learned from that period, Ferguson, Freddie Gray in Baltimore, is that when you have incidents like these, you have to speak up as a department. You cannot hide behind the images, hide behind the badge. You have to go public as soon as possible, and you have to reveal the video as soon as you possibly can. And that's why this week there was a lot of pressure on this police department and this community to make that public, to make that video available to the public so they could see it with their eyes. They didn't want to just hear police describing what they were seeing or prosecutors describing what they want to see the video for themselves. And that's what we're seeing now. And I suspect that at some point over the next several hours, we'll see what the community response is. And hopefully, I think, there are a lot of people in this community who are telling their fellow citizens to just demonstrate peacefully, and we'll see if that happens. But this is the kind of video, and especially if you look at the body cam video, the Sky Cop video, the video from the pole and the camera that's on top of the pole, it's really not as descriptive as the body camera video. The body cams that police officers across the country are now wearing more and more. And why is that? It's to hold police officers accountable so that there is video evidence of the work that they do. And what we're seeing in this case is, yes, there's video evidence, and yes, you have audio, which, we'll have to see how a jury or a judge perceives that audio and that video, but it gives you a more vivid account of what happened at that moment. It's not by any means filling in all the blanks, because there's still a lot of questions. In fact, in talking to the Memphis police chief, she herself has questions about whether the initial stop that sparked this confrontation, investigators, she says, don't really know yet what sparked the initial contact, and did the officers have probable cause. So there's still a lot of questions there, but when you look at that body cam video, and some of the panelists have raised this already, there are real questions there about why is it taking them so long to render aid for this man. Clearly, he's been subdued. He's sitting up against the car. In fact, they propped him up against that car. But in those minutes where these officers are complaining about pepper spray or complaining about this or that, training would say, hey, you need to render aid. He's down. He's clearly, been, beaten, punched, kicked. If you look at him, he must be in a condition, and it's kind of dark out there, and it's hard to see in some of these video angles. But you have to wonder, why didn't someone call for help, call for an EMT, call for an ambulance? Okay. Those minutes, think about it, that happened on January 6th. He died January 10th. Did those minutes play a role in whether he survived that beating or not? They're standing there, over him, and yet not calling anyone for help. So that's what I saw in that video, especially the body camera video, where you can hear them talking too, and what they're saying is going to be interesting for prosecutors and for the jury. It absolutely is. Jeff,
I'm going to just jump in right now because we've got some new video that we're going to show folks at home. This is additional Sky Cam or Sky Cop video. It shows the police officers dragging Tyre Nichols. It appears to be to one of the police vehicles and then propping him up against the vehicle. Alexis, I want to bring you in. We've now seen two sections of video. The first was 1 minute and 22 seconds, same camera. It showed the beating of Tyre Nichols. Now The second, he's clearly badly injured and being dragged by the police officers. The Justice Department is investigating whether his civil rights were also violated, so a separate track from criminal charges. Based on what you're seeing in these videos, are there potential civil rights violations? And if so, what would they be?
You're darn right there are.
The Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, is no stranger to the Memphis Police Department. This is a department that has been under federal court monitoring for decades because of their record of civil rights violations, primarily through surveilling citizens in Memphis. This reactivated the consent decree and the federal monitoring and response during Black Lives Matter's demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations. And so DOJ, the officials at DOJ know this department, have a long record of civil rights abuses from this department. My understanding is that the local United States Attorney's Office in the Western District of Tennessee, Memphis, is assisting in this investigation, as is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There is another state parallel investigation happening to look at any potential violations under state law that's being led by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, and then obviously Steve Mulroy's office, the local Shelby County District Attorney's Office.
So based on the video, though, the two clips that we have seen so far, what would be potential avenues that a federal civil rights investigation would explore?
Cheryl, what I see here, again, limited information, is that Mr. Nichols is subdued. He has two officers on top of him. We saw a third officer kick him swiftly in what looked to me like his head area. And even if a traffic stop is legitimate at the beginning, officers' conduct can transform into illegitimate, unlawful conduct that is unwarranted based on what Mr. Nichols is responding to.
So that would be a potential violation of his constitutional rights to be free of the excessive use of police force.
Of his privacy, of his liberty, and of course, his life.
And due process.
Exactly. Okay. Here, the police officers are serving essentially as the jury, the judge, and the executioner. There's no process here.
Omar, I want to turn to you. You are there in Memphis. We've been speaking to you throughout the evening. As you know, after the death of George Floyd, there was criticism of New York City police for how they responded to the demonstrations then. What can you tell us about preparations that went into place? Omar, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I'm wondering what kind of preparations were made in anticipation of what we might see tonight?
Well, from law enforcement, what we saw was a little bit more of an increased police presence. Marked cars, if they were unmarked cars, obviously we won't be able to tell if they were, just a regular, car or not. But there's also the mounted patrol, which is something that they've been put out. That's some police officers who are on horseback, and they usually patrol the streets. When you see a horseback, the horses make a different noise that everybody always kind of looks at, and to see a towering animal and a police officer on the back of it. But we also learned the police are coordinating with the Shelby County sheriffs as well. And
I'm going to release some more video footage. Well. This will be the first 30 minutes. The next 30 minutes, I'm going to try to catch, if they catch a live video of the actual body cam.
Get off from their jobs.
I will say this is inhumane. It's wrong. It's violating every right that every citizen has in this country.
We're hearing
and
protesting.
It's like she said on the news.
What happens if anything happens?
They basically
hopefully it doesn't.
Were the executioner of this young man's life. It's Tyre Nichols.
Still going through it.
And I pray for him, his family,
people are watching them,
and all those people that are grieving over him.
Have their own reactions.
I pray for our entire country.
I want to bring Jeff
causes
back
division.
Into the conversation.
This don't cause unity.
Ben Crump spoke
this is division in our police
department
and our government officials.
Listen.
This is only one small example.
Look at how swiftly the district attorney brought charges against them in less than 20 days. Then we want to proclaim that this is the blueprint going forward for any time, any officers, whether they be black or white, will be held accountable. No longer can you tell us we got to wait 6 months to a year, even though we got a video with evidence of the excessive
I
force.
stand with Tyre Nichols.
Jeff, you've been covering nationwide police reform for decades. What are the challenges
I stand with justice. How about all of you? Please like, subscribe, leave comments.
Challenges these days.